In the past year, I don't think any movie has been talked about as much as... I know this is exactly the last thing people need right now, some guy making a 15-ish minute long video about the Joker movie, but as much as it's been talked about, I just don't see the messages I took from the movie reflected in the conversations I've seen. I personally think the messages delivered in the movie are quite important, so that's why I'm jumping into the YouTube discussion around the movie, albeit 6 months after its initial release. A few quick words about what this essay isn't. I'm not really interested in playing a spot the reference game with all the nods and winks to the larger DC universe. I love those videos, I'll link my favorite in the description, but that's not what this is going to be. I'm also going to completely ignore all the media hype around the movie, including interviews from Todd Phillips, who I'm pretty sure doesn't understand what he made. More importantly, this video isn't going to be neutral. Art isn't neutral, and pretending like I can sit back and approach it that way just isn't how I want to spend my time. If you aren't comfortable talking about the political messages in media, you're not going to like this video. However, if you're being honest with yourself about that, you probably didn't like Joker very much either. Finally, if you're someone who wasn't interested in Joker because you've seen your fair share of movies where a white man in less than ideal conditions waxes poetically about oppression, I get it. It can be really painful to watch characters experience oppression unrealistically, and I see all the red flags surrounding this movie, but if you're watching this video, I'm begging you to give it a chance. And, spoilers for Joker.
And here we go.
I'll make my grand thesis up front, and it's that Joker wants you to equate this.
They've cut our funding. We're closing down our offices next week. The city's cut funding across the board, so...
with this.
Just want to... 10:30
on this Thursday, October 15th. I'm Stan L. Brooks, and here's what's happening. It's day 18 of the
From the very first shot, Joker ties Arthur's development as a character to the growing civil unrest in Gotham. The camera pushes in slowly as Arthur prepares his makeup. Seems simple enough, but visuals only ever tell half the story. The audio at this point is a news segment played on the radio talking about a garbage strike, the set dressing for the political parts of the story that will play out.
No one avenue without seeing nothing but garbage and rats.
It's starting to affect my business when customers can't get in here because of the garbage situation.
I'm not out that long to smell it, but I think to look at it, it's terrible.
It don't affect me except for the very bad smell here. It's horrific.
It's a mess. I've been in this country for 50 years, and I've never seen anything like it. What is this world coming to?
Put them in a room, let them sit there and talk till they get it over with. 24 hours, 48 hours, how long it takes.
The idea of the national...
Also, make sure to catch this little piece at the end.
news, the building industry and landlords today expressed concern over the latest increase in heating oil prices. Renters in the metro area...
The movie isn't particularly subtle about its messaging either. Another reason why I was kind of shocked that I saw as little discussion about it as I did. A lot of the first 2/3 of the movie play as a guided tour of the broken institutions of Gotham, and it starts with Arthur's life as a worker. Arthur works at what appears to be a clown temp agency? Is that how you hire clowns? Well, as the movie shows us, this isn't exactly the kind of job where its employees can live a life of dignity. Temp agencies aren't exactly a beacon of ethical employment practices, often used so companies can extract labor from people, usually in lower income communities, with short-term contracts that don't require them to pay benefits like health insurance. I know, I might be inferring a lot from a few short scenes, but my backup argument would be to just look at the place. Unjust labor system. Check. The other big institution that affects Arthur is the healthcare system. First thing we learn about Arthur is that he's seeing a social worker after being locked up in a mental health facility. Throughout the film, we see Arthur having less than stellar interactions with every part of the healthcare system, and about halfway through the movie, we learn that Arthur relies on a social program for his medication and therapy. And the funding for that program has been cut. Arthur's very bad life has just gotten worse. Unjust healthcare system. Check. Now is a great time to bring up the idea of systemic violence. Systemic violence is institutional practices or procedures that adversely affects groups or individuals. It's the idea that doing something like eliminating a poor person's ability to access healthcare or to earn a livable wage is as detrimental to them as something like this.
Come on! Beat his ass up! Come on, this guy's weak, he can't do nothing! Harder! Harder!
Systemic violence is so important to understanding Joker because it creates the Joker. All the hardships Arthur Fleck goes through are not random or arbitrary. They are the result of a system, and systems have designers. We'll get to that later. Really quick, a great detail that I love about the movie is that whenever Arthur has a moment where he feels in control or free from the systems he's been a victim of, he dances. It seems to be something that in his daydreams he associates with being powerful. You could say that that's a bit of a stretch, but the movie makes us watch Arthur do this. So, no you can't. Next, we're going to talk about violence, and while I feel like a lot of the movie's feelings about violence are much more abstract, I think it's interesting that this version of the Joker, with only one exception, uses a gun. I'm not going to pad this video out by explaining the gun problem in America to you, but basically, it's that guns get into the hands of people like this.
Knock, knock.
And the movie seems to be aware of it. Every scene of Arthur with a gun is not exactly a show in safe gun ownership. It's exactly what looking at someone like Arthur holding a gun would be. Horrifying. The repercussions of loose gun laws that lets someone hand off a gun in a brown paper bag is another example of systemic violence. Gun regulations are a system devised by people, and it is the result of that system that puts a gun in the hands of someone like Arthur Fleck. Unjust gun regulation. Check, check, check. Although, interestingly enough, there is one scene where Arthur uses the gun in a way that could be called heroic. This scene, where Arthur kills 3 Wayne Enterprise employees on the subway, is the only example in the film where they frame what Arthur is doing as heroic. And that's easy because look at these guys! They are comically awful. First berating the girl on the subway, and then Arthur. Arthur guns down the 3 men on the train, flees the scene, and then of course, he dances. It'll become clear in a few minutes why this scene stands in such stark contrast to the rest. We see how all these systems affect Arthur and shape who he is. In other words, the conflict of the movie is class conflict. And like I said, these systems aren't organic. They're made by people. So who made these systems? And who benefits from them? The answer is people like this.
Right, am I crazy? Tell them what you saw.
Hey, you want some french fries? Hello?
If you had to answer the question, who is the villain of Joker? A great many people would say it was Thomas Wayne. And yeah, of course it is. Thomas Wayne is the upper crust of Gotham incarnate. We don't know exactly what Wayne Enterprises does in this interpretation of Gotham, but what we do know is that he's running for mayor. Thomas Wayne belongs to the 2 groups of people that have power over these systems, the owner class and the political elites. For the time being, let's try not to roll our eyes at Arthur having such a direct connection to Batman's father, and let's try to look at this through the lens of class. It might be tempting to see Arthur as a reflection of Thomas, but it'd be more accurate to call him a result of Thomas. Arthur's hardships are the result of systems put into place by people like Thomas Wayne. Let's say Wayne Enterprises is a gun manufacturer. Someone like Thomas Wayne would use his immense resources to lobby for relaxed gun laws, or better yet, run for public office himself so he could sell more guns. And that's why someone like Arthur winds up with one. Same goes for healthcare. If Wayne Enterprises was a pharmaceutical company, someone on a social program is someone who won't pay for their drugs, so they cut the funding so they have to. The systems that Arthur are a part of are not broken. They are working exactly as designed, but they weren't made to provide healthcare. They were designed to maximize profit. Oh, and Thomas's entire plot function is to question whether or not he is Arthur's father, which he clearly is because of this scene right here. Arthur is literally the result of Thomas's actions. We see the problems with Arthur's world, and we even see who's causing it. Seems like things should be brewing. Well, they are, literally the first thing we talked about. But people like Thomas Wayne have a very powerful weapon, the media. Remember that first shot that I just yelled at you about? Here's that last piece of audio again.
The building industry and landlords today expressed concern over the latest increase in heating oil prices. Renters in the metro area.
I want you to think about what you heard, framing the price of heating oil about how it affects landlords and not people who don't own and rent property is a mild example of how media narratives can frame issues in a way that benefits the people in power, and it's there from the first scene of the movie. The main example is this guy. We're introduced to the Murray Franklin show through a scene where Arthur fantasizes himself onto it. This does two things right off the bat. It shows us that Murray is a hero for Arthur, and it also shows us the power that media has on people by showing us the power it has on Arthur. This power can be incredibly useful. For example, if you're running for public office and your campaign gets constant coverage, someone might say something like this.
Make a great mayor. Everybody says so.
Oh, yeah? Everybody who? Who do you talk to?
Well, everybody on the news. He's the only one who can save the city. He owes it to us.
Murray represents a kind of propaganda for people like Thomas Wayne. Every night, people check in for their daily fill of laughs, and they get the news spun in a way that benefits the powerful. Now, maybe Murray generally believes what he says, and in the short scene we get with him off camera, he does seem to be a perfectly nice guy, but that doesn't matter. What matters is how he frames the issues when millions of people are watching, and he frames them like this.
Son Billy, you know, the new one, the not-so-bright one. I told him that the garbage strike is still going on, Billy, and he says, and I'm not kidding, Billy says, so where are we going to get all our garbage from?
That's how the movie does it, by showing you the systems of violence that Arthur lives under, introducing us to people who perpetuate that violence for their own personal gain, while also exploring how those people keep us from rising up with the help of the media. All these things build to the point where we see this as justified.
What do you get?
I don't think so.
When you cross a mentally ill loner with a society that abandons him and treats him like trash!
Call the police,
I'll
Gene.
tell you what you get!
Call the police.
You get what you fucking deserve!
One of the main benefits of cinema is that it gives the creator complete control over space and time, and the viewer none. We have to watch Arthur's entire breakdown before we get to the end, which is why we empathize with him. In real life, when people do something like this, we dismiss them, at times correctly, as either crazy, a terrorist, or a criminal. But now we can't do that. We see that this is a man broken by the system, and this is an attempt to show us the weaknesses of those systems.
You think men like Thomas Wayne ever think what it's like to be someone like me? To be somebody but themselves? They don't. They think that we'll just sit there and take it like good little boys, that we won't werewolf and go wild.
I really wasn't interested in interpolating any kind of DC canon from this movie because it doesn't seem interested in doing it. But there is an exception in this scene. I initially was annoyed by this scene, thinking it was a weird inclusion, but now its purpose is clear to me. Thomas Wayne's impact on his son has always been a major part of the character, and Joker understands that and ramps it up tenfold, because this time, that night in Crime Alley isn't a random mugger. It's the violent repercussions of the violent systems that Thomas Wayne and people like him perpetuated. It's justice. This is the message I was hoping we'd be talking about when Joker premiered. Income inequality and systemic violence are very real things. And at the time of recording, we're really seeing the chickens come home to roost on that. In its own way, Joker showed us that these systems are real in our world and the power that they have over us. The movie was a runaway success. I think a large part of that is because when people watch Joker, they relate with Arthur, because they feel like they're the victims of the same systems. Hopefully, they have a better sense of humor than he does.
There is no punchline. It's not a joke.